Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Walter Parks, thank you so much for our theme song, walterparks.com, for more on Walter's music. Davine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. And Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. If you would like to reach out to me, nave@jamesnave.com is a good place to reach me. I'd love to hear from you. Be happy to answer you back. And like to remind you, we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to go. Today, I have someone on this call, this interview, this conversation, whom I've known for many, many years. Her name is Lillah Schwartz. And Lillah and I met back in the early 80s in Asheville when we were much younger. She and her husband, Gary, were part of a group in Asheville called the Asheville 1000. It was in the very, very beginning of Asheville starting to grow, to move in the direction where it now lives in 2024. That's been 40 years, probably, maybe a little more, a little less. You start to lose measure on those times. She's a yoga teacher. She was doing that when I met her. She's continuing to do that. She is an explorer. She dwells on subjects. She digs into subjects. She's working with the ideas of breath these days, as well as yoga, and as well as still being active in the Asheville community. So it's a real thrill to have Lillah Schwartz on Twice 5 Miles Radio. Welcome, Lillah.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. And it's been a glorious journey. It's been a glorious journey, and Asheville sure has changed a lot. But I sure remember the Asheville 1000 group back then. It was a fabulous community, vibrant and creative, and it was great.
People listening to this show, if they're in Asheville, which we do air in Asheville, we also air in Taos. Folks who live in both of those communities, they know, as we know, what makes a community vital, of course, the people in the community and how they interact and how they build and how they pass down from one generation to the next, to the next. Now, I'm going to throw something out that you may or may not know, and I'm going to go back to when I was practicing yoga at your studio, Lighten Up Yoga on Broadway years and years ago. Did you know that I had another kind of relationship with that building before the yoga studio was there? I used to go to that building when I was 16 years old, and I would go to the door and I would open it and go downstairs and I would pay my $3, and I was admitted to the Brown Derby, which was the nightclub in Asheville, the biggest nightclub in Asheville. And I was 16 years old, and I would go into the Brown Derby, and upstairs where your yoga studio was, it was a huge area because the building is really big, and there was a huge area, and I would listen to the bands like Sam Cooke and James Brown would come through and play, and I should not have been in there. And I later heard that in the back, when the building was being renovated, the architect, Jim Samsel, found a bank of telephones. It was a gambling joint as well as a nightclub. So I would often think of practicing yoga at your place and think of the gamblers and the nightclub dancers in the 50s and the 60s. Did you know that, Lillah?
I did not know that. That is history to me.
It was one of the greatest pleasures of my life to be able to sneak into the Brown Derby when I was 16, just down the street from the Fine Arts Theater, which was an X-rated theater, and Black's Pool Hall, which was just up the street from the Fine Arts. We were allowed to go to neither place when I was young, but I did manage to get into the Brown Derby. I don't know why I wanted to open that. I think it was because all of these towns have vitality. And when you were beginning your work in Asheville, tell us about how you engaged in the community earlier and how that started to inform all that you've done over the years. maybe a little sense of history for those people that are developing their communities even to this day.
What came to my mind, first of all, is what happened before the Fine Arts Theater and the Brown Derby. Initially, Biltmore Avenue was part of the trail that people herded their sheep and their goats all the way down to Charleston to sell them at market at the port. So it was a thoroughfare during that time. So it makes sense to me that those sorts of businesses would be on that route. It just makes sense to me. Yeah, it was wonderful when Jim Samsel refurbished that building and I got to move in 1982. And I had started above the Marketplace restaurant, and being young, being enthusiastic, being passionate about helping people with yoga and just wanting to get started. Now, at the time, the mountains were the mountains. And what I mean by that is that they were pretty cloistered. It was a pretty sheltered area. It wasn't like it is now, which is this huge thoroughfare with 5 million people flying in and out of Asheville Airport in a year. It's huge now. But back then it was little. And in that littleness, I remember standing in this restaurant loft area upstairs, considering to rent it. And I had 3 men standing there looking at me going, yoga won't fly. You can't do that in Asheville. You'll never succeed. And I stood there in my feisty young woman self, and I looked at them and I said, well, there's only one problem with that, and that is it's my destiny to do this now in my life, so I'm just going to do it, okay? And that was the beginning of Lighten Up Yoga. That was the beginning. And Lighten Up Yoga ran for 33 years. I kept that business going for 33 years. For a while, I was in competition with Malaprop's bookstore to see who was going to be in business the longest as the original Asheville 1000. And she won.
Well, Malaprop's bookstore has gone on to have new owners, and it's thriving. And yoga has gone on in Asheville to thrive as well. When you first started in yoga, it was a very narrow category. Now it's expanded way, way out into all kinds of arenas. What drew you to it in the first place? How did you find your way into it? And a lot of people who practice yoga practice it for spiritual reasons. Some practice it for health reasons. Some practice it for both. So what about you? What drew you into that?
So yoga for me became a healing path. So I was drawn into yoga because I had back pain and I had emotional pain. And both of those were present for me. And I was aware that I was originally trained in the Iyengar method. I mean, I didn't start there. I started elsewhere. But my first teacher was a healer. My first yoga teacher was a healer. So it was about finding my way to pain relief, to relieve my own sense of angst, my own sense of suffering physically and emotionally. So, and I found the yoga to be extremely grounding. And when I did come to the Iyengar method, it had a method. It had very specific rules and ways to do things. And it allowed me to evolve from insecurity and lack of confidence into greater confidence. So it took me a long journey, and it led me to make DVDs for people that were nationally distributed. They were available on Netflix for a time. I wrote a book, Healing Our Backs with Yoga, which was my 35 years of strong focus helping people. So it was basically, if you studied with me step by step in a class over, say, 3 months, these are the poses you would do, these are why we would do them, and this is how we would do them. And still out there, you can still get it through Amazon. I think it serves a really good purpose. I've gotten good feedback on it. Didn't hit a bestseller, but that's a lot of work to hit a bestseller. It's there and it's helped people. So I'm really happy about that. I'm really happy about that.
So I'm interested in this because I did start practicing yoga at Lighten Up Studios, I don't know how many years ago. And I also rented from you and ran artist way classes back in the 90s. So you rented your studio out. So I was very familiar with that studio, and I would go every day when I was in town, or at least it seems like it. That's my memory. Now, if you look around Asheville, and you look around Taos or any place, you find yoga everywhere. So it's grown, it's spread out, it's taken different forms. Can you reflect on all of the directions it's gone in? And some of those directions have people that are just complete gurus. Other directions are serving the community. Other directions are more physical, spiritual. What are your thoughts on it as it sits today in this culture?
Some of my thoughts about that are this. In some ways, perhaps certain aspects of the practice of yoga have lost their depth. And I think that was necessary for yoga to expand like it expanded. It had to touch more people in more different ways to expand. So what's really popular over the past couple years is yoga for PTSD, trauma-based yoga. What do you do in a so people are teaching yoga and trying to get people into their bodies, and then they're finding out they're not coming into their body because they're full of trauma. And so that's kind of where the culture has helped to direct the evolution of yoga. It's like, how do we address trauma for people so they can be in their body and find their way to healing and then find their way to their spirituality? Like I said, there's a lot of sweetness, and some of it's really superficial and doesn't drop people down into the reality that they're both a physical and a spiritual being, and there is no separation between the two. Every thought I have manifests in my body somehow, either as tension or an experience of bliss and happiness. It's going to go either way. So it's interesting, and people have to go along slowly. And of course, Asheville has become a mecca for yoga now because Dr. Vasant Lad from Albuquerque, he moved his Ayurvedic school here. And with the Ayurvedic school, his whole organization came. So they bought Asheville Yoga Center, they bought the Ayurprana listening room in West Asheville. The old church is now a sound venue as well as a venue for classes for Dr. Lad. They bought acreage in Marshall. That's an international Ayurvedic retreat center now. So they just came whoosh into Asheville. And along with that and all the families that have moved here, we now have 10 Indian restaurants in Asheville. And yesterday I had the great pleasure of making time to go into the Indian grocery store on Patton Avenue, just on the other side of the bridge. So it's been quite remarkable. The yoga community is really strong here. It's really strong. But people have to find their way. Everybody's saying they're teaching yoga, and really it's more like functional movement or some other type of calisthenics, a takeoff from Pilates, as different things. They're calling it yoga. So like I said, some of the deeper connection is a little weak, and hopefully it'll come back to that at some point in the future. I trust that it will.
And how are you going about it now? We're older. 40 years ago, we were much, much younger, in our early 30s. Now we're in our 70s, you and I. And you are still very active. You're on LinkedIn. You have engaged in social media. You're very rigorous with your social media work. So how are you addressing the needs of people today? And how is that different from when you were working in Lighten Up Yoga? You certainly don't have a facility that you're running. You do have more of an online presence. So talk about that a bit, because a lot of people still are a bit befuddled about the online experience. So what's your take on it?
That was the gift of COVID. It's a gift, it's an opportunity, and of course it's a challenge. I had made several videos before COVID hit, so getting in front of the camera and describing how to do something and showing it with my body was easy for me. The challenge is then with a Zoom situation is that time has to be allotted for the teacher to also step back and just look. And so it has to be a cooperative venture. So the student has to make the effort to create the right space where the teacher can see them through Zoom. And, lighting is an issue, wearing dark clothing is an issue, all those sort of things are an issue. But I have had some success with working online with people and helping move them along in their yoga practice. In the early days, I was into the poses and how many poses could I do and how well could I do them? What did they look like? How strong was my practice? I used to have a 90-minute practice 5 days a week. It's not like that now. Part of the online thing also had to change the way we thought about stuff. And I would say that as an adult, as a maturing adult in the practice of yoga, I recognize that people need a bigger understanding of spirituality and yoga in order to have a good practice. So everybody's got some sort of idiosyncrasy. They've broken an ankle, they've had a hip surgery, you name it, all kinds of different things, right? And so the practice becomes modified. The actual asana practice becomes modified. And that's good. But the part that is untouched by that is the breath. The part that's untouched is the breath. So the breath is like the essential connection of mind, body, and spirit. Everybody can breathe. I say it like Matt Sanford, who teaches yoga from his wheelchair, Mind Body Solutions. He's up in Michigan. And the way he says it is the asana practice discriminates. Some people can do the poses, some people can't do the poses. But breath and consciousness doesn't discriminate. So you can go to your breath, you can go to your awareness, your self-awareness, your awareness of your environment, your awareness of what's happening emotionally inside of your body. You can have access to an incredible resource. It's an incredible, incredible resource to regulate all the systems of the body. I mean, right now I'm in the middle of a study with Patrick McCowan, who wrote the book called The Oxygen Advantage, and now he's got a book out called The Breath Cure. He's out of Ireland and really involved in the evolution of the understanding of breath and how people can learn techniques to breathe and learn how to use their breath helps them on all levels. Sleep disturbances, anxiety, breathlessness, asthma, not to mention self-regulation, being able to change your state from a state of fear or worry into a different state and progress so that you can be fully present. You can understand that there's this thing like a flow state. What's it like to flow freely and have that creative energy come through you? What's that flow state like? The breath can affect all of that and bring us into a better flow state. So my personal story was in 2022. It was coming into September of the year, and my blood pressure spiked. It was the second time that happened. It had happened in the spring, and now it was happening again in the fall. I went to my acupuncturist, we got it back down again, and then it was going again. And I started feeling, I went in for a sleep test, for a sleep apnea test. And I did have moderate sleep apnea with a mouthpiece that I had been wearing for years to stop me from having sleep apnea. So it wasn't really working. And my heart was in trouble. And I knew my heart was in trouble. There was a supply chain situation, so I just bit the bullet, paid for a CPAP machine, and started using it, and started using my breath. I had a mild stroke, very mild. So my daughter, who's a physician, it kind of lit a little fire under her butt, and she got me set up so that I would wear a heart monitor for 3 weeks to see what was happening. And what the heart monitor showed during that 3-week period of time was that I was having ventral tachycardia. So my heart wasn't slowing down, and it felt like I had a 10-pound book on my chest all the time. So I start with a CPAP machine, and I started with a daily pranayama practice. I went right back to my yoga pranayama practices, sitting up. I sort of followed my instincts. I listened to my body, and I followed my instincts. And the main takeaway that I would give to other people is your exhale needs to be double your inhale, if it's possible, but it might not be possible. And when it's not possible, a relaxed breath, the exhale would be appropriately be 1.5 times the inhalation. So if I inhale for 4, I would exhale for 6. In the beginning, I couldn't inhale for 4. I could inhale for 3. And so I worked with that for a period of time, inhaling 3, exhaling 6, sitting, and just a way of calming the vagus nerve and bringing tone back to the diaphragm. So I had been under a lot of stress, and I had been holding my breath quite a bit and sitting around. I wasn't exercising enough. I was sitting around. I wasn't exercising. It doesn't have to be hard exercise, just walking, but you got to do it, right? You got to do it. So I had lost vagal tone. And what that is I lost the ability for the vagus nerve and the baroreceptors in my arteries to regulate my blood pressure. When I step out my front door and I walk up the street, it's a 45-degree angle. It's quite a steep climb. So I started walking up the street, and I did it this morning also before this call with you. Inhale for 3 steps and exhale for 3 steps. And keep a cadence. In for 2, 3, out, 2, 3, in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. And what that does is it starts harmonizing the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, and it gets your diaphragm moving, which your diaphragm has to move to get the breath regulated. It has to move. And so when we're sitting around all the time, the diaphragm doesn't move, we get in trouble. So doing that and then just keeping it up during the walk. And now I've added a few other little tricks into it that I'm practicing now. I haven't mastered, but I'm practicing, that I'm learning from Patrick McCowan about how to re-educate the breath so that it functions at an optimal level. And there's lots of promises with that. Yeah, better sleep, calmer response time. You and I had a conversation the other day about being in a restaurant and having a glass fall off the table, a water glass fall off the table on the floor, break or don't break, and have it be a shock to people. And some people's nervous system is so sensitive that they immediately go into an anxious response. Wherein if you had a calmer breath and a more regulated breath, you would go, oh, darn it, just broke that glass. Darn. And you'd move on. And so that sense of obsessing or being too sensitive is part of what it looks like when we don't have vagal tone. And in our culture right now, everybody is on edge. What the heck is going to happen next? So everybody's vagal response is up. And if we really pay attention to our breath, you're going to notice you're either holding your breath or you're hyperventilating. So you're blowing off a lot of CO2. So it could just be as easy as you think of a Wim Hof breathing, the Iceman, or holotropic breath work, or even Bhastrika in yoga. They're all hyperventilation breaths, and they're helpful to break through an emotional holding, but they're not helpful to create that deeper vagal tone so that you can have a more consistent sense of stability and steadiness. So I think it's a big deal, and I don't know how I'm going to offer it to people yet, but that's an aspect of yoga that I'm really fascinated about sharing, studying more, and I am studying more and sharing of that. So I can keep growing. I can regulate my own nervous system and then be more useful in my duties in life.
And as you were describing the breath, I was sitting here taking breath in and then letting it out, trying to practice that. And even though what you're talking about is scientifically complicated, from a body point of view, the body has to do a whole lot to make all of those adjustments. And if you were to study it, you could spend a lifetime in research on it. So it's a very complicated thing on one level. And yet I found it was a very simple thing to just sit here and breathe. So people out there listening, I would think the best way for them to practice it is to just relax and take a few breaths wherever they are and test their response to the world around them after they take those breaths versus the response prior. And I know I talk to a lot of people who are anxious. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. I really worry all the time. And I do too, not as much as I once did. I think maybe we could all be well served to relax into whatever it is we're up to without a lot of industrial demands on the actions that we must take. And I use industrial to say we're in an industrial world where everything is measured. You have to go into the room and then you report what you found in the room, or go into the meeting and you report what you found in the meeting. Is it measurable? Did it make money? Did it succeed in what we wanted? Or did I fail to measure to make money succeed? So that centeredness is interesting to me. As I look out the window sitting here in Asheville, I see trees. And one of the things I've always loved about trees, they do have a center of gravity. Trees never worry about being grounded, and they certainly know how to breathe.
So, what I would say about that, just backing up a step, what I actually ended up working with was inhale 4, exhale 7. And so you mentioned the tree because that's the visualization. When I can exhale to a full 7 count and visualize if my spine were a tree and my hair were the branches and leaves, etc., like a palm tree or any other kind of tree, then my root has to go down into the earth. And so on that exhale 7, to choose to settle into the earth, to settle into your body, to go down, to remember that as a human being, from a quantum physics standpoint of the toric field, the toric field, it's huge. It reaches up above our crown 3 or 4 feet and into the earth 3 or 4 feet. That's the invisible energy body that we are. So in essence, I kind of say to people in yoga class, I say, you're like a floating tree. You're a bubble floating on the earth. So when you exhale, get grounded. Get grounded. Put your feet on the ground. Go down into your pelvis. Stay rooted. Go to the root chakra. Go past the root chakra into the earth below you on that 7. So not only are you then exercising the diaphragm, inhaling and exhaling 7, and building your diaphragm and your parasympathetic tone, which is not hard to do in that way, you're also grounding yourself emotionally to be present. And I think the next thing people need to hear and think about is they need to turn it over. You can't solve a lot of these anxious feelings using your mind and measuring it. You got to turn it over to your spiritual body. You got to let it go. You got to say, I am anxious about this. I acknowledge I'm anxious about this. I don't have the answer. I'm turning it over. I'm going to wait to see what happens and what comes my way. Trust in turning it over. I have a minister in Unity Church, Unity of the Blue Ridge. And she made a statement one day that I still love, and I have it on my mirror in my bedroom. And it says, we walk by faith, not by sight. We don't walk by sight, we walk by faith. You don't see what the future is really going to be. But if you can be really present in this moment, turn over your troubles and say, I'm willing for there to be a solution to my troubles, and then let something come back in. Otherwise, we try and control everything. We measure this, measure that, control this, control that, and it's all stuck in our heads. Come out of your head, get in your body.
And it's true, you can't see the future. I'm thinking maybe the future and the past and the present only exist in our minds because it's a way to help us understand. Perhaps the future, the past, and the present have a different kind of existence than we're capable of actually understanding. All I know is if I sit or move, something is always right in front of me. I have no sense of its linear progression. All I've ever known is what's right in front of me. I can't prove the past. I can't prove the future, just right now. And that's why I think some people say the eternal now, because that's the only thing that we can actually experience. And even within the now, I can't prove my car is parked in the street, even though I'm looking out and I see a car in the street, but I can't see mine. So I have no actual evidence except my memory that the car is out there. I could go out there and it might be gone because somebody lifted it last night. Off they went, sold it to somebody else in another town. Who knows? And I love the idea of turning it over. I wonder if instead of turning it over, we don't have the power to turn something over as much as we just have the power to be in the turning. There's always a turning. We're always in the turning over. We can't turn this over because it's already been given up, but we can dwell and function in it and be aware that if we try to hang on to it as if we control it, it's never going to work. Like the mercury on the table, you can't catch it.
Right.
It's never going to be there. We are in the constant turning over and over and over in that circularity. Can I allow myself to let that happen to me in the flow that's happening in my body with the heartbeat and the breath and the oxygen and all of that action that I don't control? There's so much more in my body I don't control than I do control. And my body is just happily floating along. And the flow may be what we sense when we say, I'm in the flow. The flow is a result of our flow that's already there. It is participating in the turning, and we are just becoming more and more aware of it.
And allowing it, because you can go into your head and disallow it in a heartbeat.
Now, you can allow the awareness rather than allow the flow to happen. The flow is happening. The awareness is what I'm curious about. I think everybody's having that flow experience. Just some are more aware of it than others. And the more acutely aware of it you become, the more it rewards you, rather than, oh, I'm going to engage it as if it isn't happening.
There is a trusting and an allowing your awareness to go there. It's that aspect of mind that gets us hung up all the time over and over again. For me, being an emotional type, you're a very grounded, sort of practical man, kind of like a drum. You're really reliable, you're grounded, you make a nice deep tone, and I'm like a violin. I can go screeching off somewhere, okay? And so when I feel my emotions getting pulled or any tension coming into me, I have to process that in a way that says, okay, I'm choosing right now to let go of that and let something else happen. Whether I'm just being aware and then suddenly I'm aware that I'm in the flow and it just starts happening, I actually have to make that conscious choice.
I'm in agreement. I think it is a choice. It's a conscious choice to be aware of that existence that's already there. And when you do that, you get a reward. And then you come back again and do it over. And there's another reward. And what I've discovered when I'm able to do it, and I try to do it, and I'm often successful, the reward's always there. And you have proof. This is the reward. Oh, this feels great. And then I get all tightened up and I can't find my keys and I'm ranting and raving around the house because I was such an idiot because I put the keys somewhere and then there they are on the counter. I was just blind to the keys.
Right.
I stop breathing. I lose my awareness.
Right. You hold your breath.
I forget that I'm, there's no flow at all. The whole universe has just come to a complete halt. This is me thinking this. Of course, the universe is chuckling like, what do you mean? The only thing around here that's come to a complete halt is your awareness. Take a breath. Right. And I'm floundering around. But when you do take the breath, and those endorphins of joy, of levity, of humor emerge. And in the breathing, smiles come.
Smiles come. And let's look at a misconception, because everybody says, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, Jim. Where did your breath go? Into your belly or your chest and shoulders? Your chest and shoulders rose up. I saw them.
It didn't go deep into the belly.
It didn't go deep. It went shallow. It went high. So how people interpret taking a deep breath, they interpret it into the right thing to do is to hyperventilate. That was a hyperventilation breath.
Yes.
And this is a misperception. The deep breath should go from the diaphragm spreading sideways down into the abdomen. It should go down at the bottom half. So a deep breath should be deep toward the earth deep, not high toward the sky.
My goodness, I did exactly the high to the sky. And I was so confident I had taken a deep breath. And the moment you said belly, I reversed or changed the strategy. It's a completely different experience. Two different spheres of the body acting in different ways.
So, and here's the take home message with that. When you take a deep breath into your chest, you are hyperventilating and you are triggering a sympathetic stress response. When you take a breath diaphragmatically, low breath, low and deep down, then you're stimulating the parasympathetic rest and digest.
How close is that parasympathetic experience to the animal nature that we have naturally?
Well, we are animals. And if you watch animals, especially like a cat, dogs pant when they get hot. They open their mouth and breathe through their mouth. But a cat always breathes through its nose. And when a cat's sleeping, they hardly breathe at all. So they're in this long rest and digest phase. So if we really want to down regulate from anxiety and hyperventilation and tension, one of the tricks is to put your hands on the sides of your bottom ribs and breathe into your hands and then exhale. And when you exhale, give your lower belly a little squeeze, like you're hugging yourself in your abdomen. Hug your abdomen and then relax, let it go. Breathe in to your hands and then exhale and then you can start noticing how you're doing that and make it a 4-7 when that is accessible to you, or make it up, whatever works, but make your exhalation longer than your inhalation.
Beautiful. I'm doing a little practice now. Sometimes in these interviews, we'll do improvisational work. Now I'm doing like ribizational work rather than improvisational work. It feels good. I have another question to throw out as we're moving closer to our conclusion. I'd like for you to say something about sound, the sounds around us as we're practicing these more relaxed situations. Do sounds make a difference? And if so, what kind of sound? Or maybe not. Maybe you can be in the middle of Union Square, rush hour, New York City, sit on a park bench and disengage from the whole thing, even though it's a brouhaha afternoon.
Yes, I think it's imperative if you're sitting on a park bench in New York City that you disengage and go to your breath and don't go to hyperventilation. Just be present. Yeah, by exhaling longer, keeping your mouth closed. Okay, that's something we haven't mentioned. All of this breathing must be done with the mouth closed. So not open mouth breathing. The mouth, nothing in the mouth has anything to do with your breath. The mouth is for speaking and for eating food. The nose is for digesting breath. So if you want to digest your breath appropriately and really have that support for your whole system, you have to breathe through your nose.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. The more I study, the more I recognize the evidence and the research is huge. It's the nose breathing. So when you breathe through your mouth, you're hyperventilating. It even applies to athletics. The projection by the people who are doing breath work is that athletic training in the next 10 years will change dramatically, and people will be trained to run with their mouth closed.
Have you had any experience with research regarding that in terms of performance?
There is some research. I don't have all of that at my fingertips just now because I'm still in the studying. I'm still studying. But what I have heard that I can say is that when a runner collapses, they collapse because their diaphragm gives out I think we talked about this the other day. The diaphragm gives out, and so the body pulls the energy out of the legs to keep the organism alive, and their legs collapse. So as the diaphragm gets too exhausted from the run and the heavy breathing, the legs give out and collapse, and that's the end of the race. It appears that nose breathing will conserve the function of the diaphragm through time, is what it seems. But that's all I can say about it.
Speculating from that point, it would seem with nose breathing versus the mouth breathing, you would sleep better. You probably would have a lower heart rate, likely live longer, all of those things, just simply closing one's mouth.
And better immunity as well.
Of course. And also, it's probably would help in your social interaction because the less said, the better often. So if you're breathing through your nose, you wouldn't be talking.
Oh my God, that's a tough one to learn, but it's so true. You have to breathe through your nose at night also. Since my heart went off and I healed my heart, and I did heal it, I tape my mouth shut every night for the past 2 years, since 2022. Every single night I tape my mouth shut when I go to bed.
What kind of tape do you use?
I personally am just doing it simple. I just have a hyperallergenic Spider Tech kinesio tape, and I just cut a little piece off and put it on my mouth every night.
And what have you noticed in terms of the way you sleep? Do you dream differently? What kind of results do you have?
You typically are going to wake up more rested. Everybody who does it, whether they use a CPAP machine or they don't, typically say that they're surprised that they have more energy in the morning. If somebody's throat has a snoring thing that they do in their throat at night, they stop snoring and they have more energy. And if your mouth is not open, it's like you wake up in the morning and your mouth is dry, because your mouth is hung open all night. A, it shows that your mouth was hung open all night, and B, it shows that you are extremely dehydrated. And there's some sort of inverse relationship, I'm not clear on it right now, between dehydration and urination. So the more you breathe through your mouth at night, the more likely you are to get up in the middle of the night and pee. And when you have your mouth taped shut, you go through the whole night and don't have to get up to go to the bathroom.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I'm going to get the tape again. Now say the tape again so people will know what that is in case they want to rush out and get that tape.
Well, there's different kinds of mouth tape. I find the Spider Tech, it's the Spider Tech gentle, like hyperallergenic kinesio tape. And it comes in a roll, and I just cut a little piece off that. And, James Nestor and Patrick McCown, the people who are into breathing through the nose and have demonstrated the 35 biological benefits of breathing through the nose versus the mouth, just put a little piece of tape just connecting their top and bottom lip, where you can get a little air out the side if you wanted to, but just to keep your lips closed. For me, I use a CPAP many nights a week, and so I have to tape the whole thing. Otherwise, the CPAP blows the air out my mouth and it wakes me up and then I don't sleep.
Very, very cool. So if people would like to reach out to you and get involved in your work, can you tell us how they can do that?
I'm going to invite them to go to my website, yogawithlillah.com, and that's Lillah, yoga with WITH, Lillah, LILLAH.
LILLAH, yoga with Lillah. Well, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you today. It was a pleasure to meet with you the other day as well. And I'm glad I'm in Asheville, and I hope we'll have another coffee very, very soon. And it's also been a real pleasure to know you for nearly 40 years. So we have a lot of history.
Wow. Wow, it's great. My pleasure to be here with you, Jim. You're one of my all-time favorites of the Asheville 1000. You're one of my all-time favorites.
Back to you, Lillah. I appreciate it.
Namaste.
Namaste. And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Lillah Schwartz. I hope you learned as much as I did talking to Lillah, even though I've been in a yoga practice of my own for many, many years. It's always good to get some reinforcement. I especially got a lot out of the ideas she offered regarding how one breathes. So as I go forward from here, I'm going to breathe with my mouth closed. I'm going to take slower breaths in and let them out more slowly than I took them in. So the count is longer on the exhale than on the inhale. So I'm hoping that with that, I'll get a better sense of rhythm, better sense of buoyancy, of health. Maybe it will lead me to other things as well. I suspect that it might. In addition to breathing and yoga practice, Lillah and I brushed on the Asheville 1000. As she pointed out, it was a group of people in Asheville in the early 80s who were responsible for much of what's going on in Asheville today. I've talked about these kinds of approaches over the years on this show. The Asheville 1000, interesting group of people. I still see some of those people to this day. They were very influential. Jim Samsel, the architect that developed the building that housed Lillah's Lighten Up Yoga studio, also reported that there was a gambling thing going on in the back of the Brown Derby. I mentioned the Brown Derby earlier in this show. And funny enough, today I was in a little coffee shop on Broadway, the street right behind the building where the Brown Derby existed. The coffee shop's named Penny Cup. And I ran into a fellow named Roy, and he used to live in that neighborhood. And I mentioned the Brown Derby, and I said, Roy, I heard there was a rumor the Brown Derby was once a gambling joint. And he smiled at me and he said, yes, it was. I remember that too. So I confirmed my suspicions with Roy this afternoon. What's interesting about the momentum a place gets, it's interesting because it really does require people. I'm now thinking about what's going on in Taos. There's a development happening, or it's supposed to happen on the Ski Valley Road. Intense development, lots and lots of houses going up, a whole bunch of buildings going up, all kinds of commerce. And the developers submitted a plan to the county commission. And I read today online, the people in the area, the Tauseños, are not happy with the idea. Hundreds and hundreds came out to protest this development in front of the county commissioners. And that's what it takes to make something happen. Taos County commissioners voted to put it on pause. Does that mean the place will get developed? We will see. But what it does mean is that the people spoke. And that's what happened in Asheville in the 80s. The Asheville 1000 protested sometimes. Sometimes they did stop a development. In fact, they did indeed stop a development. The development was taking place in the 80s. Some developers, not unlike the ones that just arrived in Taos trying to develop this tract of land on the Ski Valley Road, the developers in Asheville showed up with this grand plan. And the grand plan was to tear down every old, dilapidated, run-down historical building in the downtown area of Asheville and put in a very modern shopping mall. The parking would be underneath. All these grand stores would come into Asheville and the commerce would just grow. Well, the people did the same thing in Asheville that they did in Taos this week. They came out in droves. They protested it. There was activism. They wrapped the city area in a ribbon so people could see how much they were taking. Now, admittedly, in the 80s, the buildings in Asheville were dilapidated. You could probably have purchased a building in downtown Asheville for $10,000 or less. Would have been run down. It would have still cost you a fortune to renovate, but you could have gotten it for a song, so to speak. And there they sat. And there were not that many businesses in downtown Asheville at the time. So we, the Asheville 1000 plus, I don't know how many others participated in that. We stopped it. The way it was stopped in its tracks, the developers were confident that the citizens would pay for it by a local tax referendum. So it was on the ballot. And it was completely soundly voted down, absolutely, totally voted down. And as a result, no mall. Well, today, when you walk downtown in Asheville, every single building is vital, full of businesses, full of apartments, lots of renovation. Almost everything has been renovated down there. And I'll bet you would not be able to buy a building in downtown Asheville for less than $1 million. Quite a improvement over the 10,000 you could have bought it for in 1980. I wish I'd bought one. I didn't, but I'm glad to see all those buildings downtown. So the Asheville 1000 was part of that. Lillah was part of the protest. I did my part as well. And now there's a vitality there. I hope the same thing happens in Taos. And I feel like the folks in Taos will make sure they have their voices heard before any ground is broken. So all of this is to say that when the people put their minds to something, when they breathe, when they stretch, almost like yoga practice, things can really happen that are vital in a community. And you won't get the destruction. You will get the commerce, the progress, the development, the vitality, and the joy that comes when a community is functioning very, very well. And in fact, just to close, I was part of a group of people, and I've mentioned this before on the show, part of a group of people who created the Poetry Slam in Asheville in 1991. Well, last week, a friend of mine invited me to come to the new Poetry Slam, or invited me to come to the current Poetry Slam in Asheville. And I thought, well, it might not be a big deal. Who knows? Probably not much. I went, and I was delighted to see the folks at this Poetry Slam, the Beast of the Mountains, it's called. And I don't know if the poets think of themselves as beast, but they certainly have large enthusiasm. It was well organized. The scores were kept well. The humor was up. Lots of advocacy, lots of cheering on. There was a slam. I even judged 0 to 10 like a diving match. I even judged 0 to 10 like a diving match, and a poet won. But the points are not the point. The point is poetry, as my good friend Alan Wolf says, who lives here in Asheville. I was thrilled just to watch these people engage and support each other. And I was reminded of all the work that we did in the 90s, getting all of that momentum started. I only did a tiny bit. I didn't do that much, but I was engaged. I was involved. And it was a real pleasure to help this community live and breathe. And in fact, I've also been involved in the Taos community for many years. I've done many things in the Taos community, and I've seen it live and breathe in its own way. Two very different communities, very different vibes. One has an elevation of 7,000 feet, and Asheville has an elevation of 2,200 feet. So it's a little bit of a difference in elevation. Asheville is green, Taos is in the desert, which is more brown and yet green because it has water. So wherever we are in the world, we can throw ourselves into things. Lillah teaches us how to breathe, how to stretch. Our community members teach us how to show up. And in doing so, good things happen. And on that note, I would like to close with a poem from my book, 100 Days, Poems After Cancer, published by 3 Taos Press. And this poem is number 64 in the series of 100 poems I wrote in 100 days. And it takes place in Taos 13 years ago at the Harwood Museum during the Verse Converse Poetry Festival, which I was helping to organize. Since we're on the subject of a poetry slam, I'd like to give you a sense of what the Taos High School students were doing. So this was their poetry slam, and it's titled To the Revolution. Around 6:30 p.m. yesterday, I took a 10-minute walk to the Harwood Museum to watch high school students slam poetry on the first night of the Verse Converse Poetry Festival. A poetry slam is performance poetry judged 0 to 10 like a diving match. The judges are chosen arbitrarily from the audience. The young poets spoke of dreams, shadows, divinity, pleasure, pain, mist, myth, passion, paradise, visions, and bliss. They held their fist high and yelled over and over again, "When the revolution comes." Even though their optimistic revolutionary pleas were a tad too fiery for my taste, I cheered anyway for all those young poets announcing to the future their visions of old knowledge they sensed but couldn't see. And that was my poem, To the Revolution, number 64 in my series of 100 poems in 100 days, and my book titled 100 Days. And in closing, I would like to say Savannah Rodriguez was one of the poets at that poetry slam. She was in high school. That was 13 years ago. Now, Savannah lives in Albuquerque. She's a nurse, owns a home there. And currently, as I speak, she's in Florida at the Southern Fried Poetry Slam Championships, and she's representing Albuquerque on the Albuquerque Slam team. 13 years is a great arc to develop a talent, and Savannah Rodriguez has done that. And so on that note, I would like to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Davine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM on Wall Street in downtown Asheville. Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. I really do appreciate it. You can always reach me, Nave, at jamesnave.com. Nave is spelled Nave. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. I would appreciate that. And I would like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com. And the motto of the Imaginative Storm is this: from the imaginative storm to the creative form. Let your imaginative mind dance with your rational mind. Put the two together in a collaboration and see what happens. imaginativestorm.com. So once again, thank you ever so much for tuning in wherever you are in the world. I hope you lean into your day, and I do hope you come back soon. And until then, maybe, just maybe, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.